The bridge of luminosity smelled of ozone and the sterile, recycled musk of the Xylanti crew. It was a scent that Sub-Officer Xylar had grown to loathe over the last 4 cycles. To a Xylanti, whose home world was a fragrant paradise of bioluminescent fungi and nitrogen-heavy mists, the dry, filtered air of a survey ship was a slow death of the senses. Xylar adjusted his posture, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking against the cold alloy of his command chair. He had 4 eyes, and currently, all 4 were staring at a flickering green cursor on his primary monitor. The cursor pulsed with a rhythmic indifference, mocking his desire for adventure. Vreen, Xylar trilled, his vocal membranes vibrating with a dull resonance. If I have to log one more solar flare from a dying red dwarf, I believe I will undergo a premature molting out of sheer psychological distress. At the station adjacent to him, Senior Watchman Vreen didn't even bother to uncurl his primary tentacle from the warmth of his nutrient bath heater. Vreen was older, his shell a duller shade of gray, scarred by decades of service in the exploratory fleet. Boredom is the greatest achievement of the Galactic Council, Xylar, Vreen replied, his voice a gravelly rasp. Boredom means the shields are holding. Boredom means the FTL drive isn't leaking tachyon radiation into our marrow. Boredom means we are in a sector so devoid of threat that we can actually hear ourselves think. Do you know what happens when things get interesting in deep space? Xylar sighed, a long, whistling sound through his spiracles. I know. Interesting is how the Sojourner was lost to a sentient nebula. Interesting is how the Krelvax was crushed by a gravity well that wasn't on the charts. Exactly, Vreen said, finally opening one eye, a large, liquid black orb, to glance at Xylar. We are currently scanning Sector 4G. It is the graveyard of the galaxy. It is a place of high-energy radiation, unstable tectonic planets, and stars that burn with a spiteful intensity. There is no life here. There is only the slow, cold entropy of a region the universe decided was a mistake. Xylar looked back at his screen. They were skimming the edge of what the charts called the soul margin. It was a quarantine zone established eons ago, though the records as to why were buried under layers of ancient bureaucratic encryption. The common consensus among the fleet was that the region was simply too volatile to support the delicate chemistry of life. The stars here were Death Stars, not because they were weapons, but because their radiation output would cook a standard Xylanti in seconds. The sensor limits are set to safe parameters, Xylar muttered, his claws hovering over the tactile interface. We're only seeing what the computer thinks we can handle. If there was a signal out there, buried in the noise of those violent suns, we'd never see it. The filters would scrub it out as environmental interference does. Vreen grunted, a wet sound of dismissal. The filters are there to keep the processes from melting. Boy, don't touch them. But Xylar was young, and more importantly, he was desperate for something, anything, to justify his existence on this ship. While Vreen drifted back into a semi-dormant state, Xylar's fingers began to dance. He wasn't breaking protocol. Exactly. He was optimizing the intake. He began to peel back the layers of the luminosity's sensor dampeners. First, he disabled the high-energy particle filter. Immediately, the screen blossomed with a chaotic spray of white noise as the radiation from the nearby soul margin flooded the sensors. It was like looking directly into a blizzard. Next, he bypassed the gravity wave compensator. The ship groaned slightly as the sensors tried to account for the massive, jagged tugs of the dense planets orbiting the nearby stars. Xylar, Vreen warned, sensing the shift in the ship's subtle vibrations. What are you doing to the array? Just looking deeper, Vreen. There's a cluster of 3 rocky planets around a G-type main sequence star. It's right on the edge of the habitable zone, but the gravity is preposterous. Look at these readings. The 3rd planet is pulling at nearly 10 meters per second squared. It's a literal anvil in space. Vreen finally pulled his tentacles out of the heater, leaning forward. 10 meters. Impossible. Anything with that much gravity would crush a sentient being's skeletal structure before they could take a breath. It would be a world of sludge and shattered bone. Even the atmosphere would be a pressurized soup of toxins. And yet, Zylar whispered, his heart sacs pumping faster. The spectroscopy is showing liquid water. Lots of it. And, wait, that can't be right. Zylar leaned in so close his mandibles almost touched the glass. He narrowed the sensor sweep, focusing the ship's massive long-range dishes onto the third planet of that hellish system. He pushed the gain into the red zone, ignoring the heat warning pings from the sensor deck 3 levels below. The white noise on the screen began to organize itself. The chaotic blizzard of the death zone started to part, revealing a steady, rhythmic pulse. Thump-whir, thump-whir. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. Pulsars didn't have that cadence. Quasars didn't carry that specific modulation. Vreen, Zylar's voice was barely a trill now. It was a plea. Look at the radio spectrum. Low frequency. Encrypted, but repetitive. It's a broadcast. Vreen pushed Zylar aside, his tentacles blurring as he checked the integrity of the data. Is it a reflection? A bounce back from a council relay? No. Zylar pointed to the directional vector. It's coming from the Anvil world. From the gravity well. From the middle of the Class 12 dead zone. Vreen's liquid eyes widened. He realized what Zylar had found. It wasn't just a signal. It was a scream into the dark. It was a defiant, noisy, and incredibly loud declaration of existence coming from a place where physics said life should be an impossibility. By the first ancestor, Vreen whispered, his gray shell turning a pale shade of fear. They aren't just there. They are shouting. As if the universe heard him, the Luminosity's computer finally broke through the static. A single, grainy audio file, a fragment of the broadcast, began to play over the bridge speakers. It was a sound of immense aggression and strange, melodic chaos. To the Xylanti, it sounded like a predator tearing through metal. Zylar didn't know it yet, but he was listening to a 20th century rock and roll broadcast that had drifted through the void for decades. The boredom of the night watch was over. The terror of the pale blue anomaly had begun.